Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. We're back to finish the interview with Joan Hansen. Part 2, great stories ahead. Let me go back to the track and maybe something that people would wonder about. I think you've addressed it, and people who haven't researched it might not be aware. Let's talk about the athlete that you collided with and the future races that. Okay, let's talk about exactly what happened. Yeah, tell me what happened, and tell me about the next time you raced with her.
This is good for people not to race the way that I'm going to describe because it's very inefficient and it can have consequences. Two European athletes, Agneta Posamai from Italy and Aurora Cunha from Portugal, probably have raced quite a bit with each other. And they were doing a do-si-do type of racing where one would surge, the other would go, surge and go past, the other would go, surge and pass. And so it was a very ineffective way to race. You're going to lose the power of a kick by doing that. Unless you're so much better than everybody else in the field, it doesn't matter. But in this case, that's not a good practice. Agneta Posamai had started to go midway of the straightaway, going into the start of the last mile. At 50 meters to the finish line, she started to go, and Aurora was inside in the pack with us. She was in front of me. As we're running along and getting near the finish line, she decides to decelerate and drift backwards. And I sense it's happening, so I immediately step out and give her that lane. I just got out of her way, and so I'm somewhat next to her and slightly back. And then she decided that she was going to break out of the pack, even though there wasn't a single bit of room for her to do that. And so as she stepped out, my foot landed on her foot, the one that was coming up as a trail leg. So my foot that was going to contact the ground didn't get to contact the ground. It actually contacted her shoe. And the person in back in that kind of a situation is the one who goes down. And that's why I didn't know I was falling, because I actually landed on something. I thought it was the ground. She continued on with her race, but if you watch the British version of that, you can actually see the jockeying that those two did. And then the outcome was that they ended up suffering. Agneta really, Posamai, she suffered a lot. And of course, Aurora. And don't race like that, you guys. Negative split is a good strategy.
Okay. When did you next race? You raced with her again.
The next race that I did with her was in Paris, along with Tatiana Kazankina, who is the world's best from Russia. She was the Soviet Union, but now it's Russia. At Paris, we did a 5,000 meters. And again, I negative split. And Tatiana Kazankina won the race. I was coming up with about 60, 70 meters to go. And I noticed Aurora Cunha ahead of me, but she was looking over her shoulder. And she was in lane 1 looking over her right shoulder. And it was weird to see her doing that because I would figure she would just focus on the finish line. But I was really coming up fast, and I knew that I was wanting to make some room. So I was in lane 3. She's in lane 1, and I'm accelerating to go past her. She immediately leaped sideways to block my way in lane 3. My hands came up onto her back when someone's suddenly in your way and you're just trying not to plow them over. So my momentum pushed her forward, and she ended up at the finish line in front of me. So my immediate reaction to this was, oh my gosh, that was an intentional move. That's a violation. And I grabbed her arm, turned her around, and told her, don't you ever do that again. And I was not smiling. That they didn't raise any flags or anything. And so when Tatiana refused the urine test, the winner of that 5,000 meters ended up being Aurora Cunha, and I ended up silver.
Do you remember how she reacted when you confronted her?
She pretty much is a European racer, and so it probably wasn't any big deal for her to do something like that. And evidently the officials didn't disqualify her either. So I'm gathering in Europe, roller derby meets track, and it's more exciting for the spectators.
You also did a couple triathlons at a high level. Was your sister in those races when you raced?
So so I actually ran cross country in the fall, not planning on running cross country. I was actually in incredibly great shape, but was going to train through for the next track season in 19. And Bob 70 of Athletics West asked if I would join Mary Decker Slaney and Joan Benoit on this cross country nationals. I said, Seb, I haven't done any speed work, but for you, I'll go ahead and race it with them because I liked him. He's a good guy, even though he's not officially my coach. So I went to the cross country nationals, and Mary didn't go, Joni didn't go. And the last 100 meters, my foot hit a ravine after rains the previous night, and I tore up my ankle incredibly horribly and ended up with a fracture that I didn't know about. So I qualified for the cross country team that was going to Portugal, but I couldn't go because of the injuries. So let's fast forward. In 1990, in great shape, but my twin sister talks me into doing cross training. I live in Seattle at the time, so I'm training triathlon for track and field. I just happened to do a triathlon there, Seafair, and it went really well. I broke a course record, I think, by 10 minutes. I qualified for nationals, for the amateur nationals. And so, as anyone in their normal, logical mind would think, if you're going to amateur nationals, you're not going to lose your status in track and field. And so I raced the nationals. I won overall. And Olin Cassell was the executive director of the Athletics Congress. And unbeknownst to me, he and TriFed's executive director, Mark Sisson, were in confrontation regarding trust accounts. Track and field, we had trust accounts so that any earnings we had would go into the trust account and then we could withdraw it. And that's mainly to record the money for tax purposes. But triathlon didn't have those trust accounts. And Olin thought it'd be a great idea for TriFed to have the trust accounts, and 1/3 of the $500 startup cost for each account for each person would go back to the Athletics Congress because running is 1/3 of triathlon. So as you can imagine, Mark Sisson wasn't going to do that. And
Wow.
so when I won $300 and a VersaClimber, Olin Cassell banned me from any international competition on the US team, which meant no Olympics, no US teams, and it killed my sponsorship opportunities. And so I realized that I was only an amateur triathlete, but I didn't have track any longer because of $300. So I switched sports and raced triathlon. My twin sister was doing international distance and long distance, and I wasn't ready to just jump into that. Started with the Danskin series and the sprint distances and did very well at that, and then branched up into the international distance and won. I won the sprint championships, the pro sprint championships in Florida. So it was nice to be able to be a national champion and be part of U.S. teams in the two different sports. And joy being a world record holder in modern pentathlon the same year I was the world record holder in track and field. Those are really neat for us. And we finished our career
special.
racing together in a half Ironman in Säter, Sweden. And we tied at the finish. And so it was it really was symbolic of how we looked at doing these races and being involved in sports. It was really terrific.
It's terrific. I wanted to ask you just one little technical thing about the triathlon. Looking at some of the results, obviously, your swimming training, your running training is already there, but your transition time from swim to bike was significantly faster than any of the others by 10, 15 seconds. Was there anything special you had about the transition skill in the triathlon, or was that just something I saw in the results?
I think it helped to be a collegiate swimmer. So we performed well in the first leg, and then the shoes were on the pedals. And if there was a wetsuit, that big contrast to my very first triathlon where I struggled to get out of the wetsuit because I didn't put Vaseline on the cuffs and the legs. So even though I set that course record in Seafair Triathlon up in Seattle, it was a long struggle to try to get out of that wetsuit. And so learning those little nuances of keeping your shoes on the pedals, being able to run the bike out and jump on and start pedaling before you put your shoes on so that you get your momentum up first is a recommendation for anyone who's doing triathlons. And the
Great
same
story.
thing is to get your feet out of the cycling shoes prior to getting off the bike and then have the quick ties on your running shoes. And if it was a longer race, I made sure I changed my socks from the cycling to the running just to preserve feet and not get blisters because a blister can literally cost someone an income. Just one little blister.
Yeah. Do you remember your final race?
That was the Setter race. We were in Sweden. Joy and I had been invited to go there, and it was a half Ironman, the only one I ever did. And it was so nice because we have some Scandinavian background in us. And so being able to go over there was very meaningful. And then people ringing the cowbells and the beauty of that location. Setter, Sweden is a little village, and it was during their summer solstice. It was at festivals, and they did a 4th of July reindeer barbecue for us. It was so cool. Just
Pretty
to
cool.
have that together, it was really terrific.
You are very positive, happy, smiling the whole way through, except when some of the emotions returned and impressed on you, and you're telling of stories again. It's a pleasure to talk with you. What became of your 501c that you developed before the 1988 Olympics?
With publicity can come peril. I had 2 stalkers, one in 1982 after the Mademoiselle magazine. In that case, I got out of the area pretty quickly twice. I left for a week after he broke into my home while I was at the library and let me know he was there with some of the things he did. And then I came back from visiting my friends in Texas, and when he stole the doorknob, I wrote love letters to all my family and friends that afternoon and evening after talking with the police and realizing we didn't know who it was. And the very next day, I left all my belongings, everything, got a backpack like I'm going to school, walked into the building, up the second floor, across, past my door of the class, down the other side, and went and took a bus and moved to Texas where I ended up training. That was my first stalker. The reason for the stopping of the other nonprofit was after the athletes were done and after they did their volunteer work, but I ended up with another stalker. But it was someone who was actually in the nonprofit with me. And so I had to literally dissolve it. And I was starting to build sister city programs. I was already getting Houston, Texas involved. I was starting to branch out to other cities because I thought that was a really neat way to help local athletes because it was a symbiotic relationship of a community really getting to know the people of the Olympics instead of being these surprises that you just see based off of who decides to market whom. There's a real wonderful neighborhood quality to helping local athletes and then the community service that they do. So I had to stop it and hide. I had to
Wow.
dissolve something I loved, and that was really tough because I put my heart and soul obviously into that, and
Yeah, it seems like your heart and soul is in everything, has been in everything you've done for a long time. What about coaching? I know you've been Arizona, California, Texas. At some of these stops, what was your coaching style?
I'm gonna go back in time to understand how the coaching surfaced in terms of the practices of coaching. When I was running in 1986, I went to surprise my mom and dad at the real estate company. I went to surprise them to have lunch together with them. And my dad, who had, they had several offices in Phoenix, in the Maricopa County area. And so as we're eating lunch, Dad says, "Honey, I was going to do a presentation for the sales staff in the morning, but how would you like to do it?" Then you have to understand, Joanne, I don't think like everybody else. I've never done this, right? Never done one of those. I go, "Dad, I've never done a presentation before, but why not?" And so I agreed to, and I went into the back of the office. Back then, we didn't have computers. I had copy paper, I had 3 colors of pens, and I had transparencies and a dictionary. And all of this kind of thinking poured out onto paper with nothing being thrown out. It was the most amazing thing. I cannot describe the effortlessness of what Dad asked for that just came out. And it was comparing the way that individuals who were born by themselves, the hierarchical construct that people learn, and how twins and triplets and quadruplets, the way that we think, and putting them next to each other, and that regarding a belief systems and the practices. And so I had an operations manual and illustrations and an operator's manual just for that presentation, and got that out to the sales staff. And then I was able to use that with the athletes when I went into the NAIA and then later into the NCAA to coach, and helped them realize if you love learning, if you focus on the love of learning, you won't focus on the A's. They will happen as a byproduct, and you'll excel without the stress. And that happened at Concordia University, Irvine. We had a 3.75 team GPA, second highest in the country of all of the ones from NCAA to the NAIA, because they focused on that. It was successful. I was able to help build a national championship team in cross country, and I handed the men's and the women's program off to a male coach as I was getting ready to go back to school. The stalker had delayed me finishing. I had transferred to Kansas State to get my degree, and when the stalker happened, I left school, and then 20 years later, I ended up getting my degree. But at Concordia University, I was thinking I was going to get my degree there. And so I ended up coaching and not being able to get my degree there, then left coaching at Concordia Irvine and gave the national championship team to him. And they ended up winning the nationals that year that I had left, that season. So I left a program that was able to stay because I didn't pluck the apple myself. I made sure that I could hand it to somebody so that the traditions that they had there would be able to be maintained. And it worked.
One thing that's happened in your careers, both you and your sister are in the Arizona Hall of Fame. How do you feel about honors?
University of Arizona.
You and your sister are both in the University of Arizona Hall
But
of
I
Fame.
can't
How do you
let
feel
me do
about
it. Let me do a little plug for ASU though too, because my brother swam at ASU and he got a scholarship after 1 year of swimming in the air and was a backstroker and was 18th in the world doing backstroke with such a short period of time with swimming behind him. Yay, Sun Devils for our brother. And then yay, University of Arizona for all the sisters. So the Hall of Fame. You were asking me about the Hall of Fame.
How do you feel? How do you feel about that honor?
I asked them to include the part about being a walk-on, and they didn't include that. So that was a little disappointing because I thought that would be an inspiration for someone who just walks up and sees that someone can do something even if they just started in college, and they didn't put that in. And so that was a bit of a disappointment. Anytime that something happens as a byproduct, it's not a waste product. It's next to the process, and it can be enjoyed, but it's not who we are. It's like titles sound really good to say world record holder and to say Olympian, but it can create a barrier for people. Working with kids, for example, I was involved on the board in Dallas and also in Southern California when I lived out there. And in order to help the kids feel completely comfortable, I was Joni Baloney. And if they're 12 or younger, they can say it out loud. But if they're 13 or older, they can only think it. And by doing that, the whole title thing wasn't anything with the kids. We had an actual relationship. They would actually listen to me and then share how they felt so that it would be two-way communication, not just them looking up to me and then whatever society's ways of creating idols. I don't like that. I think it doesn't work the same as if you're next to each other and you're authentically caring. Then that's where transfer, and it's really those individuals building their own strengths. If we can facilitate someone seeing the greatness within themselves, that's how I coached. That's how I worked in anything that I did. It's just recognizing the beauty and the capacity and capability that everyone's born with, literally born with, and just discovering it and then letting it happen. And then thriving in that element, not being compared, not going after grades, not getting judged. Swimming and running, you have time standards, which is terrific. What would I have been able to do that with something like diving or gymnastics or any other sport? Although I can't answer that, my my suspicions is that I would still just focus on the process because it would still be the best outcome that you can do and then live with it no matter what the judgments are.
Some pretty profound stuff there. And honestly, Joan, it's hard to imagine anyone feeling a barrier with you. You're open and engaging, and it's really fun to spend time with you. Thank you very much for your time and sharing all this.
I I appreciate you giving me this chance to be with you because I had a dog attack a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago. And if you had tried to contact me within the 25 months of that occurrence, I don't know that I could even have this conversation with you because I had to overcome a lot. And it took time for my brain to come back from the head shake and the face, the tear. It works, by the way. No matter what the situations are, no matter how tough they are, if you really focus on seeing beauty each day and authentically make that your priority for your life, the other things that are horrible, they don't envelop you. Your life doesn't become the horrible situation you might be in. You can move through it and you can continue to maintain the key part of what being alive is about. So thank you for picking today to call me.
I think that's your statement there is just a fantastic wrap. I know at least one person who I'm going to just immediately there's someone who I have been talking to who needs to hear that message. I think we all need to hear it, but that person needs to hear it acutely. And I think what you said is going to be something that might make a difference in even one more person's life that you don't even know. I think that's really good.
I give them the credit because it's not me doing it. It's when people discover in themselves that amazing space and capability that's the spark that makes leaders next to each other link arms to make a better neighborhood.
That's great. Many photos of you on the internet from racing days, or you can send me one you'd like to have on it.
There's two that stand out if I share those with you. One is a Life magazine photo. The photographer saw both of us fall. That's why he did that photo for Best of Life. That was of Mary and my legs. So you could see my hip and my legs with the race number, but you couldn't identify me. And we were the two Americans who fell in that final. So that's a wonderfully poignant, accurate portrayal of two teammates. The way that we were in our careers at Athletics West. The other one is Joy and I, the only race we got to do after college. During college, they didn't have us race together other than cross country. I think it was the Bruce Jenner Classic. We got to race at 3,000 meters together. And before the race, we held hands and bowed our heads together and prayed. And a photographer took it. We didn't know photographers were going crazy with cameras. We had no idea because we were focused on what we were doing. And so the next morning, as we're checking out of the hotel, the guy at the front desk acts like he knows us. And we were totally stunned that this guy could say what our times are and say, hey, you guys did really great in that race yesterday. And we're looking like, how do you know? And the front page of the newspaper in color was a photo of the two of us. I have that photo. That's really cool because it looks like a mirror of two of us.
Have you ever written your story?
People have said that would be a good idea. You know, when you have so many things that occur in life, trying to put that into a book, it's like daunting
Yeah.
because, as you can tell, to go into a story, you're going to go back into the elements of that story. For 2 years, I mourned my friends, those 3. I mourned them solidly for 2 years. After 2 years, a light bulb went off. Just one day, I realized, "Oh my gosh, I'm focusing on the end date that has nothing to do with them. I love them, and they love me. I'm gonna live my life fully, and their heart, soul, I'm gonna carry it. They're still with me. They're still here because the soul is there's energy that can't be destroyed if we look at physics. And they carried me that day. Honestly, I know for a fact I had nothing in the tank. There's no way. There's no way even to finish that race the way I was feeling. And so, how do you explain something like that beyond just understanding there was something greater than me that was in love with them and them being with me, and to think of all those beautiful heart souls over time that we get to carry. It's not a heaviness, it's actually a gain. Each person that we've ever met and the life they live, the vibrancy who they are, to know that's still with you in that relationship and that you carry it forward doesn't, it's not lost, right? It's real gain. And so that really was something that really hit home for me, for sure.
That sounds like a book worth writing right there.
If I can get a good writer,
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure you can. I'm sure you can. If you were willing, and we don't know each other, but I'll kick it around. I started doing a podcast for another group that has a history. It's a party running group.
oh
That
yeah,
was not, you know, the hash?
I know of it. I didn't drink beer back then.
Right.
I
Yeah.
drank water in the Europe for the urine tests in Europe. I was one of the few that drank water. Everyone else was guzzling beer. And I had no
Oh
idea at
gosh.
the time that was a masking agent for testosterone. So I'm seeing all these women drinking a lot of beer. And I'm like, that can't be good for athletic performance, right? Because it dehydrates you, it's a toxin. So I'm drinking water and I'm the last one leaving those urine tests. All my friends would joke because I would be the one picked because I'd have a clean test. Like it was an insured thing, right? I'd have a clean test. And so I got picked all the time, but it was supposed to be random. And it's because I didn't want to have anyone caught back then.
Oh my god.
Right? Until Ben
Yeah.
Johnson. And then once Ben Johnson happened, then they were like, turn the light on and, you have to start turning the lights on to people. And then they picked who they would scapegoat. Yeah, that's the other part. But Hashtown Harriers, I remember that. And Gary Finelli and Mike and Gary,
I know him a little. We're connected on Facebook now.
that's cool. Yeah. Have
Are
you
they?
I think I don't know if they were. They might have been. I would think Gary has the fun personality that he probably could have been. I don't know, but it's a good segue for you to check it out and see if
Your story's amazing.
when my dad asked me to do something, it wasn't sales staff that was a few people. This was a large group because it was multiple offices. And so if I had thought about it, like really thought about it, could it be intimidating to create a presentation when you've never done it before for sales staff of a pretty big company that my dad was the president of multiple listing service and he was award winning. My family, we had great role models for us to realize we were able to do things because they could. And they opened that door for us. But I should never shoot an idea down because ideas have a possibility of becoming something that means something to somebody else. I'm game.
What? Yeah, that's great. I do speaking. I've done a lot of speech contests, hundreds of them. I've coached a lot of people, and some of the coaching, what I see out of it is just making them confident and more confident in themselves. It doesn't matter about the contest, but with your attitude, what's your relationship with fear?
What is that, right? Love is the same number of letters.
Okay.
It is. And yet it's a power that you already have when you come out of the womb. I think there's already that element, more so than fear. We can learn fear, but I don't think that's our first inclination. I think our first inclination is love and not being hokey with this, but authentically. If you go to bed grateful, genuinely grateful, no matter what the circumstances are, and you wake up grateful, your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system are aligned in a continuation of an energy that is able to do the best possible thing no matter what the situation is. Other animals are better at it than we are. They're in the moment. They have amazing skills that we can't even understand, whether it's migration patterns. We can't do that. Tell me someone who can do a migration pattern without a GPS, phone, or maps, right? We lost that, right? But I think love is an amazing power. And it's not love that we generate. It's from a place that's beyond any words. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Babies, when they're born, have no language. When someone's holding a baby, you see the reflection of that connection between the person holding the baby, and it is pure. And it's this amazing quality. What do you give the word for it? Could be love. Before language, that's the basis. The humane human came out of the womb as the humane human. And then adults are telling a baby what to do as they're teaching them a language. So if I say an authoritarian language with bias, it's accurate. It's not dictatorship, although it could be, but that's not the intent here. It's just that it's authoritarian language with bias. But before that language, we're all humane humans as babies. And so the basis of who we really are to the core is that first. Once we recognize that every country and every institution has been paved with that biased language, that authoritarian language with bias, since the language was developed way back when, that bias or prejudice is embedded in every single institution because of hierarchy. Hierarchy is in itself, as the language, the bias, the discrimination. And so Joy and I had our own language that we spoke as peer to peer. And that's PEER, together, creating a language. So it wasn't judging, but we could laugh and play and be supportive and share, and we didn't fight. And that was how multiples function. And if you look at YouTube videos of twins, you're going to see it. It's pretty much, for the most part, a very supportive kind of thing. We had our own language. We didn't learn English until we were over 4. We were 4 plus. So that was our second language. And we lived in America. So when you're looking at 2 kids that are kept in a playpen because mom and dad are tired, they have 4 kids. They didn't expect 2 of us, and dad's going into another business. And young age, we weren't neglected. It's just that we were with each other a lot. So when we learned English, our brains were developed enough to see this weird thing that didn't make sense to us. That's how I could write what I did for my dad for that presentation, was a comparison of our peer-based language as multiples compared to the hierarchical language of an adult to a baby. And it makes sense.
Yeah. Do you remember what was the reaction of that group to what you said? That probably was the first time they heard such a thing.
It made sense because my dad and my mom had the real estate company, and mostly Hansen Realty. And what he taught, which was unusual in that time period, was focus on the first-time buyer. And to focus on them is not to take advantage of them, but to protect them. And most realtors were sellers, listings. That's where they made their money. That's not being a buyer's representative. And so Dad said, for the sales staff, take care of the first-time buyer, because if you do that, you'll never have to worry about anything that you do because you're doing it for the right reason at the very beginning. People will recognize that, and they'll come back to you because you are authentic in this. And so that's really, look at that. Life is made of cans, not cannots. That was a phrase that we grew up with. So that's really cool. And I got my real estate license just before the pandemic. I was the last in my family to get my real estate license. I'm really slow. And at some point, I'll sell real estate. My next step is to get a brokerage firm that has an ethical designated broker. And I think I have one now. Yeah. But if I don't do that, if I don't find one, I wouldn't want to sell real estate with a boss that controls what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
I know, because each person has their belief system of what is. My brother and my dad were award winning. They were like they were winning awards at the national level in real estate because they were the person who was genuinely there caring about
Yeah.
people. And then the returns, when I say returns, you understand returns. And so then my brother hired 2 more people to help him with the other parts because he had so many people want him to continue to buy and sell real estate with him because he wasn't going to take advantage of people. And so I think when you're in an element that lacks ethics in any profession and you find people that are ethical, I think that makes a big difference.
When people sense that, they flock to them.
I
Yeah.
think so. And so it rains soup, right? It's raining
Yeah.
soup. And then even if a downturn market, who would you still, if you, because usually in a downturn market, people sell their house because they have to. There's either a death or a divorce, or they're scaling down or scaling up, but people have to change it. That happens. And so, in that sense, it's nice to be able to help someone out when it is a tough environment. It's harder for them. But that's my next thing to cross. That's my next
Nice.
direction to cross. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for all of this. This is very cool. You're a
Yeah. Thank you.
delight.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's certainly going to be fun for me to go review.
Thank you.
All
It was
right.
fun.
Say
Bye, Matthew.
bye.
I don't know where the button is.
I'll
Where's the
take
button?
care of it.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.